and now look to Vicky Pryce to continue the case for the opposition. Hear, hear.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a late addition, as you've noticed, and as you've been told. And it's absolutely great to have the chance to talk against the motion. I am Greek, as you've seen from your notices. And it's interesting because, of course, Greece is always mentioned as a reason why we need to distrust everything that's happening in Europe. And, of course, it's true that members of my family have suffered, lots of people I know have done really, really badly, and there is a lot of dissatisfaction with the European institutions. And yet, if the government in Greece thought that it perhaps would suggest that they should leave the euro and possibly the EU, they would be lynched. That is the extraordinary thing about the EU itself and the impact it has had overall, over a longer period of time, on people's lives, and why belonging to this group is so important to the Greeks. We are living right now, of course, in a geopolitical environment which is very uncertain. To find yourself cast adrift makes no sense. But I will talk about the economy. Others here from my side will talk about politics, I'm sure. Well, the economy, we just heard a few things about Europe and how badly it's supposedly doing. For those of you who are doing economics, or any of you who can count, who can do the percentage that you represent in an economy, in a world economy, is immaterial. What we have been wanting to see is that bits of the world that have not been growing in the past can actually start improving their own position. There can be an increase in equality and actual incomes. There could be a reduction in poverty. And of course, a number of the emerging markets have actually achieved just that. They may not be terribly democratic, but they have been growing. When you're a mature economy, there is absolutely no way in which you can grow at 10% per annum. This has been the case in India and China until recently. We grow more slowly. Inevitably, we reduce the share that we represent in the world economy. And that is a good thing. So don't listen to anyone who's saying, because we're declining in terms of GDP overall in the world economy, there's something wrong with where we are. Not at all. What we have achieved is through efforts to get all these countries much more integrated, we now have a much bigger market to which we can export. And what is more, we've just been hearing about these wonderful things we actually export to India. What a wonderful country we are. Well, it hasn't stopped us exporting to all these countries being members of the EU. In fact, we export 55% of our goods outside the EU, as you've just been hearing. Now, how have we managed to do that? Given that all these countries, of course, have very cheap labour, and of course they've been competing with us very, very significantly. We have managed this because we have been members of the EU. How has it worked? It has worked because we have a trade area which has no restrictions in most areas. There are still some non-tariff barriers in services, but no tariff restrictions. And this is a big market of 500 million people. Now, what does it do to you if you have a big market of 500 million people? Again, the students of economics would know immediately. It makes you compete because everyone else wants that market, particularly if you can't hide behind any subsidies any longer. What do? You try and exploit economies of scale as far as you can. You have to innovate. You have to be more productive. And of course, because we are in the EU, and because of the proximity, of course, in relation to trade to those countries, we tend to export a lot to the countries that are near to us. This is a phenomenon that happens everywhere. We have had huge amount of foreign direct investment coming into the economy. In fact, the highest in Europe. That foreign direct investment itself has increased our productivity. And it is because we have become more competitive in Europe, because of Europe, that we are now also more competitive internationally. And we are able to do the various things that we want to do in terms of who we want to sell to. But this idea that Europe is just not growing, I mean, it's interesting. I don't think anyone had looked at Antarctica before Boris Johnson mentioned it, and it made it into a headline. The EU right now is growing faster than we are. It is extraordinary when you look at the latest export figures. It is because of the EU growing that our exports are also doing rather well right now. Our manufacturing industry seems to have turned the corner. Not because of anything we sell abroad, I mean outside the EU. And look at all these wonderful countries to which we're supposed to be selling in the future, which are going to take over from where the EU right now is. The BRIC countries, which are Brazil in recession, Russia in recession, South Africa in recession, China, lots of people fear that it's going into a hard landing scenario. India, perhaps the only one still growing and growing reasonably. You can't rely on sales to India alone. When you look at the impact that all these countries are having in their region, and you add to that Japan, which is in serious trouble, we see that the whole of Southeast Asia is actually also slowing down. You see world trade growth being revised downwards again and again, and world growth itself being revised downwards. This is not an environment which is just waiting for us to do an awful lot more. In fact, many areas of the world are in difficulty right now, and Europe is recovering. That is something that we need to bear in mind. Now, why do we worry about Brexit? I mean, trade is important. It's quite interesting when you look at where the levers are, and actually if you focus a bit more on what those who want to stay in are saying, certainly the ones who want to stay in are more concerned about the economy than about anything else, and they are concerned about the negative impact of it. Obviously, if there is a shock of leaving, we've already seen investment intentions going down in this country, we've seen employment intentions going down. If there is an extra shock, because of course they're all worried about what the result would be, it adds to the uncertainty because we don't know what type of deal we might have in the future. All economists are saying that the likely deal we're going to have is going to be worse for us than is the case right now. So therefore, there will be a short-term impact itself, and then for later on, because people will realize we're in a different environment, there will be a move to lower growth, lower productivity, lower foreign direct investment, and therefore fewer jobs and less growth in the economy. And that, I think, is a very, very important one to remember. And yet, we are told by everyone, we economists, that we don't know what we're talking about. By everyone, I really mean the other side. Suddenly, all of you who are studying PPE or anything else, which in fact adds to your expertise, are branded experts. Michael Gove has said, we don't want to hear from experts. Why don't they want to hear from experts? Because we are telling them that the EU is actually doing reasonably well, that in fact the UK has benefited from being a member of the EU, and that's why we have the growth we've had. Nothing has prevented us from being one of the largest economies in the world. Look at Germany and how well it has done itself despite the EU. We tell them also that we are, despite the regulations, one of the least regulated countries in the world. In fact, we're number 2 in terms of the league table of least regulated countries. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that migration is actually good for you, that migration has added to our GDP growth. It has reduced our deficit to GDP ratio. It has reduced our debt to GDP ratio. Without migration, we would be growing a lot more slowly, and that's what the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, is saying, and that's what loads of others are saying as well. But they don't want to hear what we're saying also in terms of the implication for jobs, the implication for the actual government finances, and the impact also on our welfare system and on all our other services. For example, if we are growing more slowly, we're going to have a problem with our deficit by the end of this parliamentary period. Remember, George Osborne had promised a budget surplus. In reality, we're going to have a hole of between 20 and 40 billion pounds as a result of slower growth if we leave. Now that will have to be made up somehow by higher taxes, low government spending, less money on welfare, and so on. All these things need to be absolutely said, but we are not listened to. So I don't actually agree with what we heard before about the heart and the sort of brain, the logic. I think actually there is a lot of passion on that side. And the reason why there is a lot of passion on the Leave side is because they don't have the facts, and they don't like the facts.